I never planned to tell this story. I swore I'd take it to the grave. But with all the recent headlines about Diddy's plea deal, Jay-Z's possible testimony, and the whispers of hidden tapes, I realized something. The truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how deep you try to bury it. I was there in the room when I saw the real cost of fame, the kind of night that leaves a stain on your soul, a weight you carry forever. If you're brave enough to listen, I'll tell you what really happened. But be warned, once you know, you can't unhear it. This is the night I stood face to face with the devil in a high-rise suite and left with a scar burned deep into my soul. The whispers had always been there, drifting through the industry like smoke in a crowded club. Rumors of what it really took to break into the upper echelons of power. You'd hear fragments in hushed conversations backstage, see the quick, nervous glances between those who knew too much. But back then, I thought I was different, thought my talent alone would carry me. I had no idea how wrong I was. I'd first heard Jay-Z's name whispered in the same breath as the word gatekeeper, the one you had to impress if you wanted a shot at real success, the one who could either bless your rise or crush your dreams with a single phone call. And then there were the darker rumors, stories of private parties where the music never stopped, where the price of admission was more than just a performance. It was a piece of your soul. I remember the first time I felt that chill. The first time I realized the industry might be darker than I'd ever imagined. I was performing at a small underground club in Brooklyn. The lights were dim, the crowd a blur of shadows and cigarette smoke. I'd just finished my set when one of Jay-Z's people approached me. He was tall, dressed sharp, with eyes that seemed to see right through me. He leaned in close, his breath cold against my ear, and said, "Jay likes you. Says you've got the it factor." I should have been thrilled. Jay-Z, the man who had built an empire, the one who had turned street rhymes into billion-dollar deals, had noticed me. But something about the way his guy said it made my skin crawl. There was a weight to his words, a darkness I couldn't shake. Over the next few weeks, the whispers only grew louder. I'd hear things at after parties, catch glimpses of text messages on other artists' phones, stories about secret rooms in Manhattan high-rises, about doors that only opened if you were willing to leave a piece of yourself behind, about powerful men who watched, recorded, and controlled everything. Then, one night, I got the call. It came through late, my phone vibrating against the sticky bar top as I sat nursing a drink after a show. It was the same guy, his voice low and direct. "Jay wants to see you. Private event. High-rise in Midtown. Be there tomorrow night. Dress sharp and don't ask questions." I should have hung up. Should have taken that call as the warning it was, but I didn't. I told myself it was my shot, my chance to prove myself, to show Jay-Z that I had the same fire, the same hunger that had built his empire. I had no idea I was walking straight into the lion's den. The next day felt like a chance at something real. I could feel it in my bones, that electric buzz that hits just before a breakthrough. I went through the motions, showered, shaved, picked out my sharpest black suit. My hands shook a little as I knotted my tie, but it felt like nervous energy, the kind that comes when you're standing on the edge of something big. When I finally stepped out into the cold Manhattan night, the air felt charged, crackling with possibility. I caught my reflection in a passing window, my eyes sharp, my jaw set. This was it, my moment. I climbed into the back of the black SUV waiting at the curb, the leather seats cold against my back, my heart racing with every block we passed. The driver didn't say a word, just a sharp nod when I slid into the seat. The city lights blurred past, a smear of neon and shadows against the tinted glass. I could feel the bass from the street-level clubs vibrating through the car, a dull, relentless thrum that only made my pulse race faster. I checked my phone, my fingers tingling with anticipation. Just a single text from the night before, the one that had set all this in motion. "Tomorrow, midnight, don't be late." I leaned back, trying to focus on my breathing, trying to convince myself this was just a meeting, just another chance to prove myself. But my mind kept drifting back to those whispers, the stories about high-rises and hidden cameras, about the powerful men who controlled it all from behind closed doors. But tonight, I wasn't just a rumor. I was about to be part of that world. We pulled up to the building, a sleek glass monolith in the heart of Midtown. It loomed above the street like a silent predator, its polished surface reflecting the chaos of the city below. The driver still didn't speak as I climbed out, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his jaw set in a grim line. I hesitated for a moment on the sidewalk, my breath fogging in the cold air, before pushing through the revolving door. The lobby was almost painfully bright, the marble floors gleaming under harsh white lights. I felt the eyes of the security guards tracking me as I crossed the polished floor to the elevator bank. My shoes clicked against the tile, the sound echoing back at me like a countdown. When the elevator doors slid open, I stepped inside and hit the button for the top floor. The doors whispered shut, sealing me in a chrome-lined coffin. As the elevator rose, my pulse quickened, the numbers on the display climbing in slow, mechanical clicks. I felt my stomach drop as the floors passed by, my breath coming in shallow gasps. When the doors finally slid open, I stepped into the hallway, my shoes sinking into the plush red carpet. At the end of the hall, a pair of double doors stood ajar, a soft pulsing light seeping through the crack. I forced my feet to move, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I finally reached the doors, I paused, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. I could feel the bass from the music inside, a slow, throbbing pulse that seemed to sync with my racing heartbeat. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the warmth of the room washing over me like a wave. And that's when I saw him, seated in the shadows, his eyes locked on me, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Jay-Z was already there, standing by the window, his silhouette a dark, towering figure against the sparkling backdrop. He didn't turn as I walked in, the soft click of the elevator doors sealing me into this moment. I hesitated, gripping the strap of my worn leather bag, the same one I'd carried to every open mic and late-night studio session, a battered symbol of my grind. I took a deep breath, forcing my shoulders back. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, replayed it in my head like a track on repeat, but none of those versions felt like this. The room was too quiet, the air too still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I'd do. Finally, he turned, his face slipping into the light, his expression cool, unreadable. Only the sharp white glint of his diamond watch caught the glow, flickering like a blade in the dark. He took a slow, measured step forward, his polished shoes whispering against the thick black carpet. I felt a chill run down my spine, my senses on high alert, every nerve firing as he closed the distance between us. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth, each word precise, like he was testing their weight before letting them drop. He moved closer, his face coming into focus, that same enigmatic mask he wore in interviews, the one that never quite cracked. "You made it." I opened my mouth to respond, but my throat felt tight, the words sticking like shards of glass. I managed a nod, my heart pounding so loud I swore he could hear it. The room felt smaller now, the shadows stretching long and thin, reaching for me like skeletal fingers. Jay-Z gestured to the leather couch near the center of the room, its dark surface gleaming like wet asphalt under the dim lights. I forced my legs to move, each step heavier than the last, the air growing thicker, more oppressive. I sank into the couch, the leather cool against my back, the cushions swallowing me whole. Jay-Z remained standing, his eyes never leaving my face, studying me, dissecting me, like a predator sizing up its prey. I felt exposed, my every movement magnified, every breath a giveaway. He took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling with a calm that felt unnatural, predatory. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice low, each word deliberate, cutting through the thick air like a blade. "I see potential. real potential. He paused, letting the weight of the compliment settle over me, twisting into my bones like a cold knife. I forced myself to hold his gaze, my mind racing, trying to find the right response, the right balance of gratitude and confidence. I knew this was a test, that I had to stand out, to prove I belonged here, but my thoughts felt sluggish, my tongue leaden. JayZ took another step closer, his shadow stretching long across the polished floor. "You want this, don't you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing, the hint of a smile creeping into the corner of his mouth. "You want to make it, to be more than just another voice in the crowd?" I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yeah, I do," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the soft hum of the city outside. He leaned in, his face just inches from mine. I could feel his breath, cool and sharp, the faint scent of expensive cologne cutting through the stale air. "Good," he said, his tone dropping, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Because this isn't a game. It never was." He straightened, his eyes flicking back to the window, the city lights reflecting in his pupils like tiny, flickering flames. My pulse slowed, my mind clearing just enough to register the weight of his words, the subtle threat that hung between us. JayZ turned back to face me, his expression unreadable once more. "Let's see if you have what it takes," he said, his voice a low, ominous growl. "Welcome to the other side." The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows stretching longer, as if the walls themselves were closing in, whispering secrets of those who had come before and never returned. I barely had a moment to catch my breath before the door behind me clicked open. I whipped my head around, my heart leaping into my throat. A woman stepped inside, her silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the dim hallway light. She moved like smoke, her heels tapping softly against the polished floor, each step deliberate, predatory. She crossed the room without a word, her eyes fixed on JayZ, her expression unreadable. I recognized her immediately, the kind of face you couldn't forget, the kind of voice that had dominated the charts for years, the kind of woman who should be untouchable, out of reach, above all of this. But here she was, slipping into the shadows beside him, her gaze never quite meeting mine. JayZ's eyes flicked to me, a thin, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I felt my pulse quicken, my skin prickling with a cold, creeping unease. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, his hand resting possessively on her lower back. She didn't flinch, didn't even seem to notice, her face a perfect mask, her body moving in sync with his slightest gestures. "You know why she's here," JayZ said, his voice low, his tone both mocking and possessive. His eyes cut to me, sharp and unblinking, his pupils flickering with the reflections of the city lights behind him. "She's part of the performance." The word hit me like a gut punch, the meaning sinking in with a sickening twist. I felt my throat tighten, my stomach lurch. This wasn't just a private showcase. It was something else, something darker, something that went beyond music and talent. The woman finally glanced at me, her eyes dark, her expression unreadable. I saw the flicker of something there. Fear, resignation, maybe even a silent plea. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same blank, detached stare. JayZ stepped back, his hand slipping from her waist as he moved to the bar, pouring himself a drink. The ice clinked softly against the glass, the sound sharp and jarring in the silence. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving me. "I like to watch people in their natural talent," he said, his tone casual, almost conversational, like we were discussing the weather. "To see them stripped down, exposed, raw. That's when you see the real them, when the mask slips." He leaned back against the bar, his glass catching the dim light, the liquid inside casting faint shadows against his sharp features. "That's the difference between me and Diddy," he continued, his voice dropping, his eyes narrowing. "He likes to get involved, to make his presence felt. Me? I like to sit back and watch the tapes. That's why we're so close. It's an unbreakable bond." He took another sip, his eyes gleaming with a cold, predatory light. I capture the moment. He creates it. That's why it works. I felt my hands clench into fists, my nails biting into my palms. I wanted to stand, to leave, to break the suffocating tension that hung in the air like a shroud, but my legs felt heavy, my mind sluggish, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a lead blanket. JayZ took a step closer, his shadow stretching long across the polished floor, his presence swallowing the room. "This is your shot," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper, "to gain everything you've ever wanted. Fame, money, power." He leaned in, his face just inches from mine, his breath cool against my cheek. "I just want one thing in return." My pulse thundered in my ears, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I felt his eyes burning into me, the darkness behind them pulling me in, threatening to swallow me whole. "Your soul," he whispered, his tone both mocking and demanding, his eyes unblinking, unfeeling. He straightened, his expression unreadable once more, his shadow stretching long and thin behind him. "Perform," he said, the single word cutting through the silence like a blade, sharp and final. I felt my heart stutter, my vision blurring at the edges. I wanted to speak, to say something, to push back, but the words wouldn't come. My mind raced, my instincts screaming at me to run, to escape, to get as far away from this place as possible. My breath came in shallow gasps as I stumbled back, the thick carpet muffling my frantic footsteps. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in, the air heavy with a suffocating metallic taste. I could feel JayZ's eyes on me, cold and unblinking, his presence stretching long and dark across the polished floor. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking, slick with sweat. My heart pounded so hard I thought my chest might crack, but just as my fingers brushed the cool, polished metal, I felt a soft hand on my shoulder, firm but gentle, her touch freezing me in place. "Wait," she whispered, her voice low, almost desperate. I turned, my eyes locking with hers, the faint light catching the edges of her sharp cheekbones, the curves of her painted lips. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, her pupils blown, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "You have to do this." I felt my stomach twist, my pulse thundering in my ears. She stepped closer, her hand sliding down my arm, her nails pressing into my skin just hard enough to hold me in place. Her breath was warm against my neck, her tone both pleading and resigned. "We both have to do this," she said, her voice trembling, her eyes flicking nervously toward JayZ, who hadn't moved, hadn't taken his eyes off me. "I owe him. You don't understand. We owe him." Her words hit me like a slap, the weight of them sinking into my bones, freezing me in place. I felt my pulse slow, my mind fogging over, the room growing colder, the shadows stretching longer, their edges whispering against the polished walls like distant screams. JayZ took a slow step forward, his shoes whispering against the thick carpet, his eyes never leaving mine. He tilted his head, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. He looked like a statue come to life, his features sharp and unforgiving, his pupils black and empty. "Come on," he said, his tone smooth, his words dripping with a dark, mocking amusement. "Don't tell me you're scared. You said you wanted this. You said you were ready." I felt my jaw clench, my teeth grinding together, the muscles in my neck straining as I forced myself to breathe, to stay upright, to not collapse under the crushing weight of his gaze. My eyes flicked back to the woman beside me, her face pale, her body trembling, her fingers still gripping my arm. "You owe me too," JayZ said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer, his shadow stretching long and thin behind him. "Don't forget that. I brought you here. I gave you this shot. Don't waste it." I felt my knees weaken, my pulse thundering in my ears, my every instinct screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this place, this man, as possible. But something in his eyes held me in place, the darkness behind them pulling me in, wrapping around my mind like cold, wet chains. "Perform," he whispered, his voice sharp, his breath cool against my cheek. His eyes flicked to the woman beside me, her hand tightening on my arm, her nails digging into my skin, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her lips trembling, her face twisted in a mixture of fear and resignation. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, her eyes flicking back to JZ, her body shivering against mine. "We have to do this. It's the only way." I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching in my throat, my mind spinning, my vision blurring at the edges. I could feel my resolve slipping, my knees buckling, my body swaying as I took a step forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked into his eyes, into those dark, empty pits. And for a moment, I felt myself slipping, my mind bending, my will crumbling. I felt his cold, unblinking stare pull me in, drag me down, drown me in his darkness. But then something snapped, something deep inside me. Some small, stubborn spark of resistance flared to life, cutting through the fog, the fear, the crushing weight of his presence. I ripped my arm free from her grasp, stumbling backward, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "No!" I choked out, my voice raw, my throat burning, my pulse thundering in my ears. I spun, my feet slipping against the polished floor, my heart racing as I bolted for the door. I heard JZ's low, mocking laughter behind me, his voice echoing down the dark hallway as I crashed into the elevator, my fingers jamming the button, the doors sliding shut just as his shadow stretched across the threshold. The last thing I saw before the doors sealed was his eyes, unblinking, unfeeling, his grin stretching wide, his teeth sharp in the dim light. The elevator shuddered as it descended, my chest heaving, my mind racing, my every nerve on fire. I had escaped, but I knew deep down that I hadn't really gotten away. Not yet. I didn't stop moving until I was blocks away, my feet slapping against the cold, cracked pavement, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The city around me felt colder, the shadows deeper, the lights harsher. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see his dark silhouette trailing me, his unblinking eyes cutting through the night. I finally collapsed onto a cold metal bench, my head in my hands, my pulse still thundering in my ears. I tried to catch my breath, to slow my racing thoughts, but his voice echoed in my head, sharp and mocking. JZ liked to watch new artists perform for him first, to see if they could handle the pressure, if they had what it took to be part of his world. But this was different. This wasn't about talent or potential. It was a test, a ritual, a twisted game of dominance and control. I realized, sitting there, my body shaking, my mind spiraling, that I had failed his test. I had walked away. I had said no, and I knew that choice had marked me, had cut me off from the path I had fought so hard to walk. As I sat there, the night stretching long and cold around me, I understood that I would never truly be free. His eyes would follow me. His shadow would cling to me. His whispers would haunt me. I tried to move on, to forget, to bury that night deep in the shadows of my mind. I went back to my small apartment, packed up my dreams, and tried to live a normal life. But the whispers never really stopped. The shadows still cling to me, dark and heavy, their cold fingers wrapped around my soul. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself scrolling through TikTok, my thumb hovering over the record button, the urge to tell my story burning in my chest. But every time I try, the comments flood in, mocking, dismissive, the laughter of strangers echoing in my ears, drowning out my truth. JZ made sure of it. He cut me off before I ever really got started, snuffed out my light before it had a chance to shine. But with Diddy's trial starting, maybe the time has come for the voiceless to find their voice again. Maybe the shadows don't have to win. This is the night I stood face to face with the devil in a high-rise suite and left with a scar burned deep into my soul.